This is Kentucky. It's in the middle of the country, full of nice people, cheap housing, and an economy that mostly exists because Washington, D.C. allows it to. And that's why it's the worst state to move to. I'll explain. If you don't know where Kentucky is on a map, it's right here. I've always felt one of the best things Kentucky's got going for it, it's not sharing a border with Mississippi, Alabama, or Arkansas. Those three are like the holy trinity of suckage. The Bluegrass State is home to around 4.5 million residents, and it's famous for a few things: great fried chicken, bourbon, horse racing, bluegrass music, and being the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln. Today we look at how Kentucky is a dependent state and why it can be a really bad state to live in. Now, to be fair, it's not just the residents are on welfare. The state is heavily dependent on the federal draw. 30.1% of the state's economy is from the US government. That's the third highest in the nation. Now, not all of it is food stamps or things like that. You've got military bases and government facilities taking a little over a third of that money. This isn't a video about poverty. It's more of a look about how bad off the state would be if the government stopped paying those bills. Let's take a look. Number 10, welfare, the main employer. There are a lot of communities in Kentucky where federal assistance isn't helping people get by, it's how people get by. This isn't temporary relief during hard times. This is the economic backbone. The check doesn't bridge the gap between jobs, it replaces jobs. SNAP, disability, housing assistance, Medicaid, these aren't supplements anymore. They're payroll. Grocery stores, pharmacies, landlords, dollar stores, and gas stations don't survive because wages are strong. They survive because benefit money shows up on schedule every month, like clockwork. When people say the economy is doing okay, what they really mean is the deposit didn't get delayed this month. And when that deposit gets delayed, there's a lot of chaos. And here's the quiet part no one likes to say out loud. Local businesses don't compete for customers. They compete for federal dollars. Entire towns rise and fall based on eligibility rules, recertification timelines, and federal policy changes. A good month isn't driven by job growth or raises, it's driven by whether benefits stayed intact. Your town's economic health may depend on a deposit schedule set in Washington. Congratulations, you don't have an economy, you have a subscription service funded by taxpayers in other states, auto-renewing every month with zero plan for what happens if the payments ever stop. Number 9, coal didn't transition, it ghosted the state. Coal didn't evolve, it didn't modernize, it didn't pivot into something new with a fresh logo and a press release. It packed its bags and left Kentucky. For decades, coal wasn't just an industry. It was the entire identity of a whole region. Jobs, schools, hospitals, tax bases, local businesses, everything ran through the mines. Then automation increased. Demand dropped, regulations shifted, and suddenly the paychecks were gone. Not slowly, not gracefully, just gone. Instead of replacing coal with anything that produced income, the state quietly swapped wages for assistance. No serious retraining pipeline, no large-scale effort to bring in manufacturing, logistics, tech, or energy alternatives. Just federal money stepping in to keep people afloat. Not moving forward, just floating. Now, am I saying they didn't pivot a little bit, the entire state? They did. They brought in some things and they tried, but there was no large-scale effort to change the identity and bring something in for the Kentucky workforce. This course led to the inevitable. Coal towns didn't get a second act. They got stuck in permanent intermission. Businesses closed, young people left, housing markets collapsed, and what remained was a population too old, too poor, and too locked in to relocate. The federal government became the default employer of last resort, writing checks where pay stubs used to be. Today, many of those towns still exist, but they don't function. They're marked as under review, frozen in time, waiting for an economic comeback that was never actually planned. It's too bad, too. This whole region was devastated by the coal industry kind of collapsing. Now, there are coal jobs and there are some mines, but nothing like it used to be. Like I said earlier, there was a couple different things. I mean, there was automation, which killed a lot of jobs since the 1980s. There's policy changes, people moving away from coal for cheaper fuels. Number 8, disability, a long-term financial plan. Kentucky's disability rates aren't high because everyone suddenly got injured at the same time.
How much longer we gotta wait here?
Been here since sunup, Earl. My back is killing me.
This isn't a mystery outbreak of bad backs and blown knees. It's what happens when an economy stops offering work that actually pays. In large parts of Kentucky, jobs are scarce, wages are weak, and whatever work does exist tends to vanish the moment the plant closes or a company restructures. When employment feels temporary and benefits don't feel permanent, people do the math. Disability doesn't promise a good life. It promises a predictable one. And predictability becomes priceless when everything disappears every few years. Over time, disability turns from emergency support into a long-term survival plan. It's not about laziness or gaming the system. It's about stability in a place where stability no longer comes from work. When the safest income stream is a federal check instead of a paycheck, the labor market has already failed. When paperwork beats employment, something has gone very wrong, and instead of fixing the conditions that make work unreliable, Kentucky leaned into the system that made not working the most reliable option, like it was a strategy, not a warning sign. Now, there's no hate going towards the people of Kentucky that are on disability. I'm sure there are some people gaming the system, but overall, it is a bad situation. The state didn't have a good strategy as coal started to fade. Kentucky is not the only state living this nightmare. Around 4 to 5% of U.S. adults receive Social Security disability benefits. In Kentucky, that percentage is 14%. Number 7, local governments gave up because the check clears anyway. Why fix zoning laws? Why attract employers? Why modernize anything? When the federal dollars keep the lights on, urgency quietly dies. In much of Kentucky, local governments aren't rewarded for solving problems. They're rewarded for remaining eligible. If the money keeps coming in, the crisis is considered manageable. Instead of rebuilding local communities or economies for that matter, officials focus on stretching grants, filing reports, and waiting for the next round of assistance. Roads don't get fixed here, they get patched. Water systems don't get upgraded, they get held together with extensions and emergency funding. Every problem becomes a temporary issue that somehow lasts for decades. Sort of like when you casually mention to your wife that dress might be a little tight for her. Economic development plans read like a wish list written during an election year. Big promises, zero follow-through, and a heavy reliance on outside money that may or may not ever arrive. There's no urgency because there's no immediate consequence. Decline happens slowly enough that nobody is forced to act. Why take political risks? Why push reform? Why innovate at all? When Washington keeps refilling the tank, Kentucky's local government stop driving and just idle, hoping the engine doesn't finally give out while everyone's pretending the car is still running. Number 6, healthcare exists because of government life support. Rural hospitals in Kentucky aren't hospitals anymore. They're Medicaid billing centers with stethoscopes and waiting rooms. The mission quietly shifted from providing comprehensive care to surviving the next reimbursement cycle. Federal dollars don't strengthen these hospitals. They keep them technically alive. Buildings stay open, lights stay on, and administrators stay busy filing claims. But services keep shrinking, maternity wards disappear, mental health care is trimmed, specialists move on to places where they can actually build a career instead of fighting a spreadsheet. Doctors leave because they have to. Nurses burn out, entire counties rely on emergency rooms that function as urgent cares by necessity, not by design. Remove federal reimbursement and large parts of Kentucky instantly become medical deserts. Not hypothetically, immediately. The system doesn't wobble, it collapses. Kentucky's healthcare is ranked 45th in the nation according to US News. The 3 categories they have to rank them: healthcare quality comes in at 47th, public health comes in at 44th, and healthcare access comes in at 23. You know who just beat Kentucky? Louisiana. This is a state where some people actually rely on voodoo. Kentucky's healthcare doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. It leans hard on the federal crutch and somehow still manages to limp, proving that survival funding and sustainability are not the same thing. Number 5, education trains people to leave the state faster. Kentucky uses federal money to educate people so they can immediately leave Kentucky. The system works beautifully, just not for Kentucky. Students earn degrees, polish resumes, and then quickly scan the local job markets. What they see is limited opportunities, low wages, and industries that peaked somewhere around the fax machine era. So they smile politely, thank the state for the education, and head to Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, or literally anywhere with economic oxygen. Universities stay funded, graduation rates are celebrated, meanwhile the talent pipeline flows straight out of state. Kentucky doesn't retain its human capital, it exports it. fully trained, partially subsidized, and ready to boost somebody else's economy. The cruel irony is that education is doing exactly what it's supposed to do: prepare people for opportunity. The failure is that Kentucky didn't bother to create opportunity worth staying for, so the state pays to sharpen the tools, then hands them over to their neighbors. That's not a brain drain going on in Kentucky. That's a state-funded relocation program with a graduation cap and a gown. Now, there was a study done back in 2022, so it's a little old, but you'll get the idea. The average for college graduates to stay in their home state or wherever they got their education, it's about 67% of them. That's the national average. Wisconsin has the highest with about 74% stay in state. Kentucky, 41%. More than half of their students are leaving the state. The closest one to Kentucky was Alabama with 43%. Number 4, military and federal facilities. Fort Knox, VA hospitals, and federal offices in Kentucky are great if you work there. The paychecks are steady, the benefits are solid, and layoffs aren't exactly common. On paper, they look like economic wins, but they're not engines, they're bubbles. These facilities don't integrate into the local economy, they float above it. They don't spawn clusters of private businesses, startups, or supply chains. The surrounding towns don't grow, they orbit, surviving off predictable federal payrolls without building anything new around them. Now, they do get some benefits. I mean, soldiers or whoever's stationed or whoever's working in these facilities live in these communities. They go to the restaurants, they go to the stores. So there is some benefits of having a military base near your town. They do supply some local jobs to the civilians, like on Fort Knox and like VA hospitals. But it's not like they open one up and all of a sudden there's 20,000 new jobs for the community. So the employees clock in, they collect a check from Washington and spend just enough locally to keep a few restaurants and gas stations alive. That's not economic development, that's controlled circulation. If the base closes or federal budgets shift, the entire orbit collapses. The first base I was ever stationed at was Fort Ord in Monterey, California. They shut that one down, and it sat empty for quite some time, and eventually they turned part of it into a university. University of California, Monterey Bay. But when your strongest employers answer to Washington instead of the market, you're not building an economy. You're babysitting payroll, hoping Congress doesn't change its mind and pull the plug. I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying it's 100% bad to have a military post or government facility in your town or in your state. There are a lot of benefits to it. But as we've seen, especially in recent years, sometimes the government decides we don't need to spend money on something anymore. And they shut down a VA hospital that employed 900 people in a small community. They decide they don't need a reserve training center anymore at Fort Knox. That means less soldiers at the fort to come and shop and buy gas and maybe rent an apartment in your area. So when they cut back to save the American tax dollar, some of our communities get screwed pretty hard. Number 3, infrastructure only exists because the state can't afford reality. Kentucky roads, bridges, and water systems exist because the federal government periodically swoops in like a parent fixing a grown child's car. Local tax bases are too weak to maintain what already exists, so everything becomes a temporary fix. That lasts 25 years. Planning doesn't happen. Maintenance is optional. Grants are the plan. Kentucky doesn't budget, it waits. You know, I've always thought for states like this, they always put up whenever they're expanding a highway or something like that, they put, "This is brought to you by the state of Kentucky's public works system," or something like that to promote who's really paying for it or who's doing the work. I'd one time like to see some work going on a bridge in, let's say, Kentucky or Mississippi. They got a sign that says, "This bridge work is being brought to you by Texas tax dollars or California tax dollars," something like that. Be honest. Number 2, federal money removed the incentive to dream. Federal aid didn't lift Kentucky out of poverty. It froze poverty in its place and made it more tolerable. The desperation did ease, but the ceiling disappeared. People aren't starving, and that matters, but they're not advancing either. There's food on the table, which is a wonderful thing. A roof over your head, even better, and just enough stability to survive, but not enough momentum to build anything better. The system prevents collapse, not growth. In shrinking towns with declining populations, starting a business makes no sense. There aren't enough customers. There's no workforce pipeline, and local capital dried up years ago. Risk-taking doesn't get rewarded, it's punished here. Meanwhile, assistance is predictable, reliable, and easier to plan around than an economy that no longer exists. Over time, ambition doesn't die loudly, it fades. People stop dreaming bigger because the math doesn't work. Survival is guaranteed, but success is optional and rarely attainable. That's how stagnation becomes normalized. Kentucky didn't hit rock bottom. It rented a federally subsidized studio apartment down there. Utilities included, ambition not covered. Now, I feel like I should say this again. That's what these federal dollars are there for, to help people in need. And I know there's going to be a bunch of people in the comment section talking about lazy this and lazy that. No, that is some people. That's no matter what. You're dealing with humans, there's going to be some kind of laziness or gaming the system. That's just how everything works. But you got to have opportunity for the people that don't want to be lazy and game the system. All right, before we get to number one, if you're thinking about moving out of Kentucky or to any state, there's a link for a really good website called Home and Money in the description area below. They can get you in touch with a real estate agent anywhere in the country. All right, on to number one. And number one, bringing it home. All right, so we're going to bring this one home. This is the big one. Kentucky doesn't compete economically. It qualifies. Its primary skill isn't production, innovation, or growth. It's eligibility maintenance. Federal money didn't bridge the gap after industries collapse. It became the foundation. And once your foundation depends on Washington, the ceiling disappears. No growth, no momentum, just managed decline with direct deposits. Now, the whole premise of this was that their economy is far too dependent on the federal government. And that's why it's not a good place to live right now. I mean, if something happens and all of a sudden, I don't know, God forbid we get in a war, yeah, you're going to see a lot more federal money flowing into Kentucky and a bunch of other states. But the reality these days is bases are getting smaller or closing. Federal facilities are, again, hiring fewer people, getting smaller or closing. And the state of Kentucky waited far too long to really put a lot of effort into manufacturing. Right now, they're one of the top states for manufacturing. It's been growing, but it's still not near what they need to put some of these towns and communities back in the black. Hopefully the moves they've been making over the last few years do keep growing, and that'll be better, but they're still way behind the curve on what they need. And they shouldn't just rely on manufacturing. They need to start putting more effort into getting tech. I mean, that's where everything's going. Those college students will stick around if you have more tech jobs. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.